Our virtual guided tour of Selbridge starts on the one and only road bridge in the village. And the reason for that is that Celbridge derives its name from an ancient crossing that forded the River Liffey at this point. And that crossing, it brought you from Dublin Bay to Galway Bay. It was one of only 5 principal roads that crossed Ireland at the time, and it was known as the Slee War or the Great Way. In the 6th century, St. Makua tiptoed across the old ford crossing here, and he built a wooden church close by, the church close to the bridge, Celbridge. Now we're going to leave the bridge and step onto the main street, and across the road you can see the Village Inn and the Duck pubs. In the early 18th century, these buildings, they were one holding, Carberry's malt house. A malt house, like that's where you lay out the grains to dry before brewing. And it's here on the 24th of September, 1725, that Arthur Guinness was born. The story here goes that Arthur's father, he was a tenant farmer from Dublin. He came out to sell milk on the side of the old Dublin to Limerick Road over near Keelan. And when he was over there, he met a young girl, Elizabeth Reid. She was a farmer's daughter as well. She was selling ale on the side of the road. The Reids, like that family, they had a licence to brew ale. These two became a couple. They came into Selbridge looking for work, and Richard got a job as a land steward in one of the big houses. There was a Reverend Arthur Price in Oakley Park, and in time, Reverend Arthur Price came down to the main street. He bought up the malt house, that's where the Village Inn and the Duck pubs stand, and he leased the top of it to Richard and Liz. 9 months later, a little baby is born, and that baby was christened Arthur, after the Reverend Arthur Price, who became the baby's godfather. Reverend Arthur Price, he left £100 for baby Arthur to spend when he grew up. He was a hard worker and he was an entrepreneur. He took out a lease on a rundown brewery in Leixlip. 3 years later, in 1759, James's Street came on the market, and that was a 4-acre rundown, ill-equipped, disused brewery. The lease was for 9,000 years, and it had an annual rent of £45. Once Arthur signed that lease, the rest was history. And I have to say, we're delighted that that story starts here in Selbridge. Our next point of interest is Selbridge Abbey grounds, and that's located on the Clane Road. It's there beside the Abbey car park, so some of the listeners might be aware of where that car park is. It's just 2 minutes from the main street. Selbridge Abbey is the court and grounds of Esther van Hamrick and Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels. Esther, when she was a small girl, she lived at Selbridge Abbey in 1697. Her family moved to London in 1707, and that's where she met Jonathan Swift for the first time. She became a student and she fell madly in love with him, but he didn't return her love in the same way. He gave her the pet name Vanessa because he didn't want anybody to know that these two were having a relationship. Jonathan then was appointed the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1713, and he returned to Ireland. And Vanessa, she followed him back to Ireland. She wasn't giving up on him, and she came here to live at Selbridge Abbey. She wrote letter after letter begging him to come out and visit her, and her persistence paid off. Eventually, out he comes on a white horse, and it's said that they had a lovely relationship on the banks of the River Liffey for 3 years. Their special meeting place was a bower overlooking the weir at Selbridge Abbey, and it still exists today, and it's a place of great beauty. Sadly, Vanessa hears that Jonathan has another woman in his world, so he's having an affair. So she's brokenhearted, and she writes to the other woman, who is Stella Johnson, asking, "What's the nature of your relationship with my Jonathan?" Stella shows the letter to Swift. He's really, really angry at this stage, comes out to Selbridge, slams the letter down in front of Vanessa, and he leaves in a rage. She knew that she was never going to be in his arms again. Romantics would say she died of a broken heart. She had actually been nursing her sister Mary, who had died of TB, and Vanessa died of TB herself in 1723, aged 35 years. She's buried in St Andrew's Church, that's close to where the statue of Molly Malone is located there in Dublin. We're now going to make our way to that little church close to the bridge that we spoke about at the start of our tour. It's located 2 minutes from the main street on Church Road, and this is the site of St. Macua's wooden church, and it's known as T Lane Graveyard. And in here we have the Henry Gratten Vault. Henry Gratten was an MP and he succeeded in giving Ireland its independent parliament in the late 18th century, known as Grattan's Parliament. The reason that the Gratten Vault is in Selbridge is because Henry's mammy, Mary Gratten, she lived in Selbridge Abbey, where we've just come from. And she'd take Henry as a small boy out to visit Grandad Marley down around the Abbey. And then he wrote as a young man that among the grooves and bowers of Swift and Vanessa, I grew convinced that I was right. And that is that he was right in his political beliefs. Henry Grattan's son, Henry Gratten Jr. MP, he's buried here at the Grattan's family vault in Celbridge as well. We're now going to make our way back to the main street. All of the points of interest that I'm taking you to, they're all either on or within 5 minutes walking distance of the main street. So we're up at the top of the town now, and before we go through the majestic gates of Castletown, we're going to stop at the oldest house on Main Street, Kildrouth House, dated 1719. It's a very fine merchant house. Its story goes back to the time when William Connolly arrived in Celbridge prior to 1719. Later on in the tour, I'll explain who William Connolly was. William intended building his country mansion at the top of the town. On arrival to Celbridge, he wasn't at all impressed with our main street. In his view, it was beggarly, with rows of mud-thatched cabins. We had geese and pigs running around, so a very dusty affair. William, however, was the wealthiest man in Ireland at this time, so he was able to buy up all the lands on the main street, and he leased the lands to his wealthy colleagues on condition that they would build fine houses of stone with gable ends and chimney tops. Kildrouth, I suppose, is one of the finest examples of what Connolly wanted for the main approach to his mansion. We're standing at the top of the main street, about to go in through the gates, but before going in, I want to point out that a short distance away on the Maynooth Road, we have Selbridge Workhouse, which is now occupied by Colour Trend's paint factory. There were 3 workhouses in the county, and all of the workhouses, they closed their doors as workhouses around 1922, and that was with the formation of the new established Free State. When our workhouse closed as a workhouse, it became an army barracks for the new Free State Army, and Michael Collins came to Celbridge to inspect the uniforms of these soldiers. Sadly, over the years, lots of children died in that workhouse. Today, the workhouse is in the ownership of the O'Connor family. Now, if you're all ready, we're going to walk through the gates of Castletown House. It's an 18th century lime tree avenue, French style, very romantic, and at the top of the avenue, Castletown House reveals itself. It was once said that this is the only house in Ireland to which the term palace can be applied. Speaking of palaces, the house here, I'm told, it had 230 windows, but Buckingham Palace also had 230 windows, so we had to close up one of ours. And if there's any children out there listening, if your mammy told you to go out and clean the windows at Castletown, it would have taken you 3 weeks. Castletown was built between 1722 and 1729 for William Connolly. William was born in Donegal in 1662. He was the son of an innkeeper, probably of Catholic origin, but changed over to the Protestant faith. His parents sent him up to Dublin to be educated. He became a barrister and a politician representing the people of Dublin and the people of Derry. He was very, very successful, and he was the Speaker in the House of Commons. He married Catherine Cunningham, who was very wealthy in her own right. Around this time, 1690, you had the Battle of the Boyne. And after that battle, William Connolly was given the job of transferring land to the supporters of William of Orange, who was triumphant in that battle. With every land deal, Connolly's pockets got fatter and fatter till he became the wealthiest man in the country. And Castletown House is a statement of his wealth. Today, the house is managed by the OPW. They've done a fantastic job restoring the house and the parklands. They've been working from the original drawings by Lady Louisa Connolly. She lived there in 1759. The river walks, the lake, the temple, ice house, bath house, gate lodges, and they have pleasure gardens up there. And it makes Castletown a wonderful place to visit. When you stand on the steps of the house, you look out on 120 acres of open parkland, bounded by the River Liffey, and you hear the lovely flowing sound of the water. A beautiful place to visit. Selbridge, what we consider to be our truly historic village.